Hello, this is Michael. I'm the developer for a game called The House, which I created in 7 days for the 2019 7-Day Roguelike Challenge. All coding and art was done by me during the event. I wanted to give this talk to tell you a little bit about the game and the dungeon generation approach that I used, because I thought it was somewhat unique, how I did combat, the difficulty scaling that I used, and some information about my 7-Day Roguelike experience. As I said, the game is called The House. I did a separate video walkthrough of the game. I would encourage you to check that out if you're interested in more detail. What I wanted to create was a comic horror done in a hand-drawn black and white art style. And again, I talked a lot about that in the other video that I created, so I'll tell you much more as we progress here as well. Specifically, I wanted the dungeon generator to create something that looked like a pen and paper RPG or board game, where you turned over those large chunky tiles that had lots of smaller tiles on them, ideally with lots of interesting content or like cool things, surprising things to really amp up the exploration aspect of roguelikes. So I really like that part. I wanted to have larger rooms and the ability to have non-square rooms. I felt like a good way to approach this was to have like a core dungeon with the ability to inject area or room templates. And I wanted, of course, to resemble a house because the original story idea I had was to take place within a house. So more square rooms and corridors. I had been aware of Wang tiles and thought that was a good place to investigate. I found a really great site called CR31 that had some extensive information about them and how to leverage them. And in particular, I was interested in the two-edge, two-corner blob tile sets described there. I actually took this image from that site, and it describes a set of tiles that can be reduced to 47 total tiles without rotation and even further to 15 with rotation. And even just looking at it, this really looked like what I wanted to accomplish, but I took a different approach than just to make these individual tiles, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So what I wanted to do going into the 7-Day Roguelike was to use those blob tiles for the connectivity of the larger segments that I had imagined. So I thought I would use these larger 9x9 tile segments that I could have some space to illustrate interesting content onto, and use the blob tiles for just aligning the doors and edges. I felt like I would be able to do this to make larger rooms of varying shapes and sizes and really do anything that I wanted, down to smaller details up to very large rooms if I wanted. I felt from a art and dungeon creation perspective that I would have a base skin that would apply to the majority of the dungeon with special segments injected into the dungeon as needed, or whatever rule set that I created. And then I would have a piece of data that would go along with each segment that would explain to the generator which areas are walkable or doors or other things that it needs to know. Also going into it, I plan to use both Rogue Sharp for the dungeon model and basic roguelike tools, and Unity for the mesh to display the dungeon. Just to expand a little bit on the idea of segments that I had, was really to take those Wang tiles and expand them up to 9x9 chunks that I could then do whatever I wanted with. For each set, there would be a base segment, which would be the main one that would be generally applied. And then for each one, I could also create custom segments, which I could really put whatever I wanted inside of them. And even if I wanted to have larger than 9x9 segments, I could do that and put a larger group of segments into the generator and have it tile around that. So I plan to handle rotations in code so then I could accomplish really reducing the number of tiles that I needed to create. Just to give you an idea of how I did the art, I was able to boil down really those base dungeon pieces into the 6x6 grouping of tiles. I did a little template / perspective sheet because I had planned to make a lot more of these during the week. Just due to time constraints, I really only ended up with one primary skin that I used, but it would have been pretty easy to have a bunch of different skins. I just didn't because then I spent a lot more time creating interesting segments with whatever limited art time I had remaining. So here's some examples of the custom segments that I used. These were just things that I thought would be fun. Really, I was just trying to kind of push the boundaries of the tiles a little bit and come up with fun things that might be surprising to come across as you moved around in the dungeon that would also give it the theme of a house, or maybe used in ways that you don't expect. I really wanted to do a lot more with this. This was really kind of the point of the generator, but just due to time constraints, I could only get so far. So I want to tell you a little bit about the combat mechanic that I used because I thought it was somewhat unique. It was fully deterministic and visible, so you could see the attack, health value, and moves remaining for both the player character and the monsters. It kind of evolved through the week as I felt like I got to something that was fun. I really kind of stopped with that and just kept it. I thought this approach was really beginner friendly because all the information is up front once you understand the interface. But to contrast, it was more puzzle-like than maybe some roguelikes would be, and that could make it less interesting for some people. That kind of gets to the difficulty scale I'll talk about in a bit. I wanted to have some kind of interactions that would change these stats, so I have items added into the game that you find on each level. I really wanted to do a lot more with that than I did. Things that maybe would change item values temporarily or reduce health for a certain number of turns or something like that, but just again due to time was only able to do a limited amount with the items. Health regeneration out of combat was just a way to get around having to have an inventory to heal between turns, and that seemed to work pretty well and to make each combat unique. I would have liked to have gotten more feedback during the event just to confirm what I felt about the combat mechanic, and I would advise people to do that in general as they're progressing. Just the way that things came together late in the week, I didn't have as much time as I'd like. So on the difficulty front, I wanted to make a game that could be won without a lot of time invested. Being a 7-day roguelike, I didn't expect people would spend a lot of time, but if they kind of got hooked into the game, I wanted them to be able to have a pretty good run through on their first attempt to see the majority of the game and what it has to offer. Also wanted a game that I could beat, and I think that a lot of people could beat. So I thought of this idea of having this difficulty slider in the game where, if you really wanted to play it on a harder level, that option would exist. And so I put a slider into the game that adjusts linearly the difficulty of all the monsters in the game. And the player also increases every other level, just because it would be impossible for them to keep up with the curve if they didn't. So I thought I'd walk through kind of the daily screenshots and kind of how I progressed through the week to give you an idea of how it went. On the first day, I was able to get my segment map created on a mesh within Unity. And this is kind of what it looked like, the original mesh. And a visual mesh, which was actually a separate mesh that I used that just took one of the drawings that I had and applied it over the entire skin just to see that it was possible. On the second day, I was able to get the dungeon generator going, and so it looked a little bit like it did on the left, but I started running into issues with tiles not matching up correctly, and as I progressed, I found this was due to corner issues where the connectivity of the corner on one tile was open and it was closed on the other tile, and that created some problems for me, but I just made an exception tile list for certain tiles like 119 and 127 on this page that allowed it to match in either case, and that helped me just progress and not get stuck. It wasn't until days 3 and 4 that I started to get the player and the first mobs or monsters in the game, and was able to start putting my custom segments down. This was also during the work week now, so I had a lot less time to work on things throughout the week. days 5 and 6 is when I really started to press myself on the fact that I didn't really have a game yet. All I had really was a dungeon generator and a guy moving around the screen. And so this is when I really made all the progress that I needed to add the menus, the win-loss conditions, the levels, increase the amount of mobs, put messaging in the game. And really it wasn't until this time frame that I really had something that I could have another person play and call it a game. I would definitely encourage people to do this much earlier in the process if possible. Again, the dungeon generator was one of the main unique things that I was going for, so I spent probably too much time on that up front. On the final day, I just had a really major cram session. Decided I wanted to have a final boss for the game. I had originally intended to have probably more different things other than a final boss, but of course, time crunch. I spent a good chunk of the day coming up with that and made a bunch of the segments that got put into the game. This is when I really started to kind of fill out a lot of the content that I originally had envisioned in the game. Added in the difficulty menu at this point, did all the playtesting, bug fixing, and polishing. And then, was up really late that night. And as I was closing it down, I realized I couldn't just have a blank title screen, so added this little drawing of the house at that very late hour. So in retrospective on the 7-day roguelike experience, all the advice that you'll hear in the podcasts and on the subforum, it's all true from what I experienced. Do you really want to get your game playable early and iterate as much as you can from that playable game? Try not to innovate on too many different dimensions. I spent probably too much time on the dungeon generation again, which was one of my main points of innovation. I would say try to prepare what you can in advance. In a way, this works against the second item, or at least it did for me, of keeping my scope in check, because I did have so much in mind going into the challenge that I wanted to accomplish, and so that was kind of battling against keeping my scope in line. And I'd also suggest using tools you're familiar with, unless that's really one of your main objectives for the challenge, is to use it to learn a specific new tool. I would say the years that I've done the best in the challenge, I really fully committed to it. This means arranging time with my family, taking a day off of work, just really treating it like my main focus for the week. The years that I've done that, I've done well. The years where I've attempted it more casually, I haven't made it nearly as far. I feel like it's important to stay motivated by having a reason for taking on the challenge, to figure out what you really want to get out of it. And, in this case, this year for me, it was really that idea I had for the dungeon generator that I got excited about and motivated me throughout the week. I really wanted to push that and, at least get it far enough that people could see what was possible with that. But you'll have your own reasons for doing it, and, I would encourage you to use that as your motivation for the week. Kind of general software engineering, you're going to end up cutting things, so make sure you do the things that are most important to the success of your vision first, so that you can at least get those parts done. There was a lot more things that I wanted to do in this week that I didn't have time for, but I felt like I got a lot of the key things I wanted done. I really feel like there's a lot more that could be done with the way that I did the dungeon generation. That could go a lot farther. I had envisioned having themes for different levels, having lots more different segment types. And I really found that to be kind of a fun element of going through the house, was just kind of seeing the different areas and how they unfolded and how the generator put those segments together into the house. So that was an area that I felt like people might be interested in. And that's really the end. If you have any questions about my dungeon generation, the 7-day roguelike experience, or any of that, please reach out to me. I would be glad to answer any questions. I wanted to give a special thanks to some of the people that helped make my week successful by providing their skills and knowledge. Like I said, I leveraged the Rogue Sharp tool, as well as the Unity port that was put out there. I took a couple of fonts off of a free font website and really found a ton of useful information on the Wang Tile blog at CR31. So special thanks to all of those people. Thank you very much.